Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you, the listener, to visualize a very specific, very painful moment.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
You probably do. So you are at a dinner party, or maybe it's one of those forced corporate networking events. You are standing around a high-top table holding a slightly warm glass of white wine.
The worst kind of wine.
Exactly. And the conversation is flowing. Everyone around you seems incredibly smart, incredibly plugged in. And then suddenly, the spotlight turns to you. Someone looks you dead in the eye and asks, so what is your take on the current geopolitical situation in the Balkans? Or maybe, what did you think of the cinematography in that new indie film?
And the room just, it goes completely
The room
outside.
goes silent. And in your head, it is also silent. Dead silent. You know, you should know this. You feel like you read a headline about it just 3 hours ago on your phone. But the file in your brain is totally corrupted. It's what we call the anxiety of the empty head.
It is a universal nightmare. It really is. It's that stomach-dropping sensation of being exposed as a fraud right there in public. And it's interesting you frame it that way because today's source material, Imogen Lloyd book, The Intelligent Conversationalist, it starts exactly there. It doesn't start with a sterile list of facts to memorize. It starts with the sheer visceral panic of social survival in the modern age. It goes straight to the heart of our deepest insecurities.
That fear of social rejection.
Yes, the fear of being unmasked.
Hmm.
Because humans are social creatures, right? To be deemed unintelligent or out of touch by the tribe, that triggers a very primal alarm bell in our psychology. We are terrified of being ostracized for not knowing the right things.
And coming from her, from the author, that validation is huge. I mean, she is a Cambridge graduate. She's been a contributor to MSNBC, to Fox News. She is literally professionally paid to be smart on live television. And even she admits to having this recurring nightmare where the red camera light goes on, and she completely lacks the killer fact. She just freezes.
Which brings us to the core thesis of the book, and honestly, I find it so forgiving. She distinguishes between a CPU, a computer processor, and a human being with a pulse.
The CPU versus the pulse. Let's unpack that because I think we conflate the two in our own expectations all the time.
We do. We absolutely do. Look, a CPU can process all the data in the world. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get social anxiety. It doesn't have a bad day or forget a name because it had too much coffee. It just processes binary code. A human with a pulse simply cannot do that. We are emotional, biological, messy creatures.
Right.
Yet we are drowning in an ocean of information. Think about it. We have 24-hour news cycles, we have Twitter feeds, infinite streaming algorithms. We are bombarded with discrete data points every single second of the day. And despite that biological limitation, socially, we are still expected to have a fully formed, articulate opinion on literally everything.
Everything. From the nuances of the Euro bailout to the latest celebrity red carpet dress. From Supreme Court dissents to the history of Renaissance sculpture, it's a completely impossible standard.
It is.
We are expected to be walking encyclopedias, but we're really just tired people with jobs and families trying to keep up.
Yeah.
And that gap, the gap between what we think we are supposed to know and what we actually retain, that is the breeding ground for massive social insecurity.
And because we can't be encyclopedias, when that panic sets in at the dinner party, we often regress. We become what Lloyd Webber calls the lazy linguist. And I have to say, this is the primary villain of today's deep dive.
The lazy linguist.
Yes, the person who, when the anxiety hits and the brain empties out, defaults to filler words as a crutch. Like, sort of. I mean,
Okay, I feel slightly attacked right now. I'm pretty sure I use the word like as a spoken comma half the time.
oh, we all do. It's a totally natural defense mechanism when we're searching for a thought. But the author's ruthless about this for a very specific reason. She argues that using like and repeatedly, unless you are literally quoting Shakespeare, isn't just a bad habit. It is a broadcast signal to the entire room that you are an empty head.
It's a status killer.
An immediate tip-off. It tells the listener, I am not confident in what I'm about to say, and therefore you shouldn't be either. It lowers your perceived intelligence instantly, regardless of how smart your actual underlying point might be.
So the mission of this deep dive today, the whole point of unpacking this book, is to defeat that lazy linguist inside us. We're going to build a toolkit for you, the listener.
She calls them cheat sheets, and I love that analogy. Think back to high school or college. A cheat sheet was that tiny, densely packed scrap of paper with just the essential formulas you needed to survive the exam.
Well, adult life is really just a series of spontaneous social exams.
That is a terrifying way to put it, but
Right.
entirely accurate.
Right. This book is about handing you those scraps of paper so you can talk to anyone about anything at any time without breaking a sweat.
And the underlying philosophy here isn't, go to the library and learn everything about everything. It's far more pragmatic. It's the idea that perception is reality. Precisely. You do not need to hold a PhD in Western art history. You just need to know enough to swim to safe territory. You need to know enough to sound competent, drop a fascinating detail, and then, and this is the master skill we will heavily analyze today, you need to know exactly how to pivot out of danger.
So it's a bit of fake until you make it, but armed with a vastly superior vocabulary.
In a sense, yes, but she ties it to this concept of truthiness, which we will explore deeply later on. It's about arming yourself with what she calls crisp facts and disarming words. If you have those, you never look like a deer in the headlights. You remain the one controlling the flow, the tempo of the conversation.
Okay, let's pry open this toolkit. The book is structured around these different cheat sheets, and the very first one is the absolute bedrock of the entire system, the English language itself.
Because you cannot build a reputation as an intelligent, compelling conversationalist if your foundation is crumbling underneath you. And that foundation consists of grammar, spelling, and vocabulary. The author is starkly clear here. Unless your spelling and grammar are airtight, you will find it nearly impossible to win any debate.
Even if you're right.
Exactly. It does not matter if your underlying logic is flawless. If you deploy the wrong word or mangle the syntax, you lose your credibility in a fraction of a second.
It feels a little, I don't know, a little harsh, doesn't it? Like, if I have a brilliant strategy for a project, but I happen to misspell a word in the company email, is the strategy suddenly bad?
The strategy isn't bad at all, but the transmission of that strategy is compromised. People judge the package. It's what I call the Dan Quayle effect, which the book highlights brilliantly.
Oh, poor Dan Quayle.
Yeah.
He will literally never live this down. Just for any younger listeners who might not know, Dan Quayle was the vice president of the United States under George H.W. Bush back in the early 90s.
And he has become the patron saint of why precise vocabulary is a life or death matter in public speaking. So he was giving a speech trying to emphasize family values, which was a core foundational platform for him and his party. He meant to say, Republicans understand the importance of bonding between a mother and child.
Bonding, a very wholesome, normal political talking point.
Right, but he didn't say bonding. He slipped up. He said, Republicans understand the importance of bondage between a mother and child.
Bondage. Well,
Bondage. He changed one syllable, just one. And suddenly, the Vice President of the United States is standing at a podium talking about something that is extremely different from traditional family values, something that belongs in a very specific, very different kind of club.
that is the ultimate malapropism.
It really is. A malapropism is when you use a word that sounds remarkably similar to the one you intended, but it has a completely different and usually absurdly inappropriate meaning. And that one's slip-up. It made him a global laughingstock. It stripped away his executive authority in an instant. The late-night hosts feasted on it for months.
And the book makes the point that in our current age, the age of social media where everything is recorded and screenshotted, these slips are permanent. You can't just misspeak and hope it fades into the ether anymore.
No, the internet is forever. She gives a very pointed anecdote about a British prime minister's wife to illustrate this.
Right. She doesn't name names, but the context is clear.
Exactly. She describes a PM's wife who took to Twitter to express an opinion, and in her tweet, she misspelled the word definitely. She spelled it D-E-F-I-N-A-T-E-L-Y, definitely, with an A.
And the internet just absolutely ate her alive for it.
Devoured her. And the author's psychological analysis of this is fascinating. She argues that for a massive percentage of the voting population, that single spelling error physically knocked IQ points off the prime minister's wife in their minds. It immediately planted a seed of doubt. People unconsciously thought, wait, if she can't even spell the word definitely, why on earth should we trust her husband's judgment in running the national economy?
It sounds incredibly elitist on the surface.
It does sound elitist, but Lloyd Webber isn't saying it's morally right. She's saying it is a harsh social reality. She points out that even on dating apps like Tinder or in casual Facebook updates, these errors are what she calls attraction killers. They signal a lack of attention to detail, a lack of education, or just a lack of care.
It's what she calls the don't be a Muppet rule, which I love.
Yes, we definitely need to define Muppet for this context because it's a crucial piece of British slang she introduces. Now, in America, if you call someone a Muppet, you're usually thinking of Kermit the Frog or Miss Piggy. Lovable, fuzzy, felt creatures. It's almost endearing.
Right, like, oh, you silly Muppet.
But in the UK, if you look at someone and call them a Muppet, you are calling them a complete and utter idiot. You are saying they're a fool who has absolutely no idea what they are doing. The entire goal of this first English language cheat sheet is to guarantee that you never, ever look like a Muppet in public.
Speaking of the divide between British and American English, this is a total minefield that the book maps out. I honestly never realized how dangerous it could be to just use your normal, everyday vocabulary across the pond.
It is treacherous waters. And the author, being a British woman who is based in New York, she navigates this cultural whiplash on a daily basis. Let's look at a seemingly harmless word, the word quite.
Quite. I use that all the time. It seems totally benign.
Right. In American English, if you go to a restaurant and tell the chef, that meal was quite good, you usually mean it was very good. It acts as an intensifier. Or if you say, you are quite the dancer, that is a solid compliment.
That means exceptional.
But in British English, quite operates almost in reverse. It often means merely somewhat or not entirely. It is a subtle, polite put down. So imagine an American boss telling a British employee that their quarterly presentation was quite good.
Oh, no.
The American thinks they're offering praise. The British employee hears, your presentation was barely adequate, it lacked substance, and I am deeply disappointed in you.
That honestly explains so many awkward Zoom calls I've had with teams in London. I thought I was encouraging them.
But see, quite is just a mild corporate misunderstanding. Then you get into the actively dangerous words. The book issues a massive warning specifically about the word fanny.
Yes. The classic American tourist accessory, the fanny pack.
Exactly. In the United States, a fanny pack is a convenient little zippered bag worn around the hips, resting on your rear end. Fanny means bottom. But in the United Kingdom, fanny refers explicitly and somewhat vulgarly to female genitalia.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine the sheer absolute horror of a loud American tourist standing in the middle of Piccadilly Circus asking a police officer where they can buy a nice fanny pack for their daughter.
That is an instant catastrophic Muppet moment.
The locals would be paralyzed with shock, and the book points out another trapdoor word.
Tosser.
Tosser, like tossing a salad or tossing a baseball back and forth. Not in London. In the UK, a tosser is essentially a wanker, someone who masturbates, and by extension, it is a highly offensive term for a contemptible, arrogant idiot. So if you are at a fancy restaurant in Mayfair, you absolutely do not want to jovially call your waiter a tosser just because he expertly tossed the Caesar salad at your table.
Good to know. So the overarching lesson here is really about profound situational awareness. If you are crossing the Atlantic, physically or virtually, you have to actively scrub and translate your vocabulary.
And you must never, ever try to fake the accent. That is one of her cardinal rules for social survival. She notes that when Americans attempt a British accent at a party, they inevitably sound like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins having a stroke. It's a disaster.
Blimey, Governor.
Exactly that. Don't do it. Leave the local slang to the locals. Your goal is to be clearly intelligible and respected, not to perform a cheap caricature that makes everyone uncomfortable.
Okay, so we've patched the foundation, we've cleaned up our grammar, we're carefully avoiding saying bondage when we mean bonding, and we have permanently deleted the word fanny pack from our European travel vocabulary. Now it is time to go on the offensive.
Yes.
The book transitions into what I like to call weaponized vocabulary. This isn't just about being grammatically correct anymore. It's about actively deploying specific words to stun an opponent or command a room.
She calls them disarming words, and I think that's the perfect label. These are high-value words that serve a very specific, strategic, psychological purpose. They instantly upgrade the intellectual frequency of the conversation. They signal to everyone in earshot that you are well-read, discerning, and not to be trifled with. And she provides an incredible A to Z glossary of them.
Let's pick out the heavy hitters from that list. The ones the listener can actually memorize and deploy next week at the office or at a dinner party. Let's start with the A's. Avarice.
Avarice is a magnificent word. It simply means extreme, insatiable greed for wealth or material gain. But the strategy here is, why should you use avarice instead of just saying greed?
Right, because greedy gets the point across.
It gets the point across, but greed is a common pedestrian word. If you say, he's just greedy, you sound like a child complaining on a playground because someone took 2 cookies. It lacks gravity. Avarice, on the other hand, has this heavy, almost biblical weight to it. It sounds sophisticated. The author suggests deploying avarice specifically when you are critiquing institutional power, like Wall Street bankers, corrupt politicians, or the IRS.
So instead of sitting in the bar and saying, man, these new corporate tax rates are just greedy, you take a sip of your drink and say,
The sheer unbridled avarice of the current tax code is staggering.
oh, that's good.
Do you feel the difference? Suddenly, you don't sound like a disgruntled taxpayer complaining about a bill. You sound like an Ivy League economist offering a sweeping moral judgment on society. It elevates the entire complaint.
It totally reframes you as an authority. Let's jump down the list to one of my absolute favorites, mostly because it sounds so strange. Borborygmus. Borborygmus, spelled Borborygmus. It sounds incredibly intimidating.
It sounds like a rare medieval disease, or maybe one of the darker Harry Potter villains. Beware the curse of Borborygmus.
It does, but it is actually just the formal, scientific medical term for a rumbling tummy, the gurgling noise your stomach makes when you're hungry.
Which is hilarious, but how on earth is that a weaponized social word?
The author outlines a brilliant, highly specific psychological scenario for this. Imagine you are on a date, a first date. You are sitting at a quiet, intimate table in a nice restaurant. The conversation lulls. There is a moment of dead silence, and suddenly your stomach growls, loudly, aggressively.
It's mortifying, the absolute worst timing. Usually the instinct is to shrink down, blush furiously, cover your stomach, and mumble, "Oh my gosh, excuse me, I'm so sorry." You look weak, you look embarrassed, but if you own it, if you look your date right in the eye, give a charming little smile, and say, "Oh, please do excuse my borborygmus," you have instantly transformed a moment of physical embarrassment into a dominant display of esoteric vocabulary.
It's a complete power move.
It is. It completely breaks the ice. It shows that you don't take yourself too seriously, but it simultaneously proves you have this deep, quirky well of knowledge. It's the essence of confident nerdy. You took a moment of vulnerability and spun it into a moment of charismatic strength.
That is genius. Okay, here's a word I saw on her list that I legitimately thought was just a joke word we used in middle school to sound smart. Disestablishmentarianism.
Ah, yes. We all learned anti-disestablishmentarianism when we were 12 because we were told it was the longest word in the English dictionary, but nobody ever knew what it actually meant.
Right, it's just a party trick.
But Lloyd Webber connects it to real, potent conversational meaning. Disestablishmentarianism is the political movement to separate the church from the state, specifically, historically, the withdrawal of state support from the Anglican Church. So anti-disestablishmentarianism is the movement against the separation of church and state. She connects this directly to modern political debates like arguments over school prayer or the religious right in U.S. politics.
So if you are at a dinner party and the conversation turns into a heated, messy argument about religion in public schools, dropping disestablishmentarianism isn't just showing off.
Not at all. It acts as a conversational circuit breaker. It shows you understand the deep historical context of the argument. You aren't just shouting talking points you heard on cable news. You are referencing a centuries-old structural political struggle. When you deploy a word like that, it physically forces the other person to pause and think, wait a minute, does this person know significantly more about political history than I do? It signals profound depth.
Let's look at a word used for social hierarchy. Hauteur.
Hauteur versus arrogance. This is a vital, razor-sharp distinction for anyone navigating high society or corporate ladders. Arrogance is just being a jerk. It's loud, it's insecure, it's stepping on people to make yourself look taller. But hauteur, which translates roughly to haughtiness, is a high-fashion, cultivated attitude.
How does it look in practice?
Think of a legendary supermodel gliding down a runway, refusing to make eye contact with the crowd, or a grand dame at a charity gala who merely nods when spoken to. You can possess hauteur without being overtly cruel or arrogant. It implies a certain aesthetic style, a freezing, untouchable coolness. Think of Meryl Streep's character in The Devil Wears Prada. She wasn't just arrogant, she weaponized hauteur.
So if you are describing a notoriously difficult CEO and you say, well, she certainly possesses a certain hauteur, it's almost a compliment.
It's a very nuanced observation. It's a respectful acknowledgement of their status and their deliberate emotional distance, whereas just saying she's arrogant is a flat, unimaginative insult.
There is also umbrage.
Yes, to take umbrage. It means to take offense or annoyance at something. And for the millennial generation that grew up heavily reading fantasy, the author makes a brilliant connection to the character Dolores Umbridge from the Harry Potter series.
Oh, I never put that together.
J.K. Rowling is a master of etymology. She didn't choose that name by accident. Professor Umbridge is a woman who literally takes offense at everything and causes deep offense to everyone around her. She is the personification of taking umbrage, making that connection in conversation, saying something like, oh, he's taking umbrage again, acting quite the Dolores. It adds this fantastic layer of pop culture literacy combined with classic vocabulary.
And we have to give one for the board game nerds out there.
Xenon.
Yeah.
Xenon. Scientifically, it's a heavy, colorless, odorless noble gas. But practically speaking, it is your absolute savior on a Scrabble board when you are trapped with an X and an N. You must keep these utilitarian words in your back pocket.
Essential survival skills. But let's be totally real here. Sometimes, even with a mind full of Borborygmus and Hotur, you just get backed into a corner. Someone asks you a highly specific question about, say, the structural economic reforms in Argentina or the finer points of string theory, and you have absolutely nothing in the tank. Your mind is blank.
The dreaded CPU failure.
Exactly. The book has a dedicated solution for this exact moment of terror. The pivot.
The pivot is, without a doubt, the ultimate weapon of the truly intelligent conversationalist. It is the dark art of buying time. The author actually confesses her own go-to filler phrase when she was put on the spot on live national television and didn't know the answer. Her phrase was, on some levels, yes.
On some levels, yes.
That's what I meant.
That is incredibly sneaky. It sounds like you are agreeing profoundly, but you haven't actually committed to a single fact.
It is entirely brilliantly vacant. On some levels, yes. Creates this magical 3 to 5 second window where your mouth is moving, but your brain is frantically searching its archives for a safe new topic to jump to. It makes you appear deeply contemplative rather than confused. It signals to the audience, I am processing the vast complexity of your thought, even if your internal monologue is just screaming, help me, I don't know anything about Argentina.
It's so much better than just staring blankly and saying,
Another fantastic pivot she suggests is starting a sentence with the word recently.
Recently, let's test that.
Okay, if someone aggressively asks you, what is your detailed analysis of the current housing market crisis? And you haven't read an economic paper in a year, you just nod slowly and say, well, recently.
Oh, because recently is infinitely elastic.
Exactly. Recently is vague enough to mean anything that happened in the last 48 hours or anything that happened in the last 5 years. It buys you that crucial moment to dredge up literally any headline you casually scrolled past on Twitter 3 months ago. Well, recently we've seen a shift in suburban demand. Boom, you're out of the trap.
I love that. Let's role play a slightly more hostile scenario. The pivot is great for ignorance, but what about aggression? Someone at the table actively attacks you. They look at you and say, you're being incredibly rude right now.
The counterpunch. You need a phrase that shuts them down cold without elevating your own volume, without making you look like the aggressor. One of the absolute best lines she offers is, frankness is usually a euphemism for rudeness.
Ooh, that is ice cold.
Isn't it? It is the perfect surgical strike against that specific type of toxic person who always defends their terrible behavior by claiming, I'm just being brutally honest, or I'm just a frank person.
We all know that person.
You just calmly look at them and reply, frankness is usually a euphemism for rudeness. You instantly reframe their supposed honesty as a basic lack of manners. You strip them of their moral high ground.
What if someone attacks your attitude? Like, you have a real attitude problem today.
You pivot the blame entirely to their cognition. You say, I don't have an attitude problem, you have a perception problem.
Perception is reality, bringing the core theme full circle.
Exactly. And for the ultimate word nerd shutdown, when you just need someone to stop talking entirely, surely it's no coincidence that the word listen is an exact anagram of the word silent.
That is a total mic drop moment. It's essentially telling someone to shut up and listen, but wrapping it in an intellectual puzzle so they can't easily get mad at you.
Precisely. You end the engagement on your own terms and you leave them standing there trying to spell out the words in their head to see if you're right.
Okay, so we have the mechanics down. We can talk the talk. We have our disarming words. We have our evasive pivots. But eventually, you do need some actual content to pivot to.
Right, you can't just say recently for an hour.
Exactly. And the book dedicates a massive, incredibly useful section to art history. And I deeply appreciate the premise she uses here. You do not need a master's degree in fine arts. You do not need to know every brushstroke of the Renaissance. You just need what she calls talking points and quirks.
She calls it cocktail party art history. And the philosophy is brilliant art isn't just about dried paint on canvas. It's about the soap opera of the people who created it. People at parties don't want to lecture on color theory. They want gossip. They want drama. They want personality. So she starts us off with the Renaissance Trinity, plus one.
Let's start with the plus one, the grandfather of the whole movement, Giotto.
Giotto. Now, the talking point to memorize here is the story of the perfect circle. This is the anecdote you keep in your back pocket for when you're standing near a painting at a gallery. The legend goes that the Pope was looking to commission some major works, so he sent a messenger to Giotto demanding a sample of his art to prove his genius. He wanted a complex sketch, a biblical scene, something elaborate to prove his worth.
And Giotto, being a bit of a diva.
Giotto didn't paint a scene. He didn't sketch a portrait. He simply took a paintbrush, dipped it in thick red paint, locked his elbow tightly against his side, and in one fluid, unbroken motion, he drew a mathematically perfect circle on a piece of paper. He handed the paper to the messenger and said, "There, that's it. Take that to the Pope."
That is just immense, staggering confidence. That is the definition of hauteur right there.
It is the ultimate 14th century mic drop. It proved that his technical, physical control over the brush was basically superhuman. No one else alive could do it. So if you're at a party and someone pompously brings up the origins of the Renaissance, you just take a sip of your drink and say, well, it really all begins with Giotto's red circle, doesn't it? The sheer audacity of the man.
You sound like a tenured scholar immediately, and it took you 10 seconds to learn.
Exactly. Next in the timeline, we have Donatello. And the book issues a very stern warning here. Do not, under any circumstances, mention the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
I feel like that's a hard habit to break for my generation.
You must break it. Donatello is the sculptor. The crisp fact you need to deploy here is that Donatello created the very first bronze equestrian statue, which just means a statue of a guy riding a horse since the fall of the Roman Empire. It's called the Gattamelata.
But why is a guy on a horse such a big deal socially?
Because for 1,000 years during the Dark Ages, humanity literally forgot how to cast something that large and complex in bronze. The technical skill was lost to history. Donatello figured it out and brought it back. That statue physically signaled the return of classical imperial grandeur. It proved the Renaissance had truly arrived. That is your talking point. It's about the resurrection of lost technology.
Moving on to Botticelli.
Botticelli is the Vogue artist of his era. The author quotes the actor Peter Ustinov, who brilliantly said that if Botticelli were alive today, he would be the creative director for Vogue magazine. He loved painting curvy, ethereal women. He loved flowing, sheer fabrics and hyper-aesthetic lines. His work is just unapologetically pretty.
So what's the pivot or connection to make there?
The connection to make is to a later movement called the Pre-Raphaelites. You casually draw. Of course, you can see why the Victorian Pre-Raphaelites were so utterly obsessed with him. Doing that shows you don't just know one artist. You understand how the timeline of art history loops back and influences itself centuries later.
Okay, now we hit the absolute heavy hitters, the superstars. Starting with Leonardo da Vinci. Everyone knows the Mona Lisa, everyone knows the Last Supper. So what is the deep dive angle that makes you sound uniquely intelligent?
The angle is focusing on the profound quirkiness and the scattered nature of the man himself. He wasn't just a painter. Honestly, painting bored him half the time. He was a wildly distracted genius. He left behind over 13,000 pages of notes. 13,000. And they weren't mostly about art. They were obsessed with human anatomy, dissecting corpses, designing flying machines, and inventing brutal war machines.
He was the ultimate ADHD visionary.
Absolutely. And his personal life was scandalous. He was illegitimate, which severely limited his early career options. He was formally charged with sodomy and barely acquitted. But if you want to talk about the Mona Lisa at a party, don't talk about her smile. Talk about the gossip.
That kind of gossip.
There are endless academic conspiracy theories. Was she secretly pregnant? Is the painting actually a self-portrait of Leonardo in drag? Did she have jaundice, which explains the weird yellow tint of her skin? But the most profound, crisp fact to drop is that Leonardo actually never delivered the painting to the man who commissioned it.
Really? He just kept it?
He kept it. He traveled with it everywhere he went for the rest of his life until he died in France. He was deeply obsessed with it. It wasn't just a commercial job he cashed a check for. It became his lifelong companion.
That reframes the whole painting. It changes it from a masterpiece in the Louvre to a deeply personal obsession. What about his great rival, Michelangelo?
Michelangelo is the anti-Leonardo. Where Leonardo was charming and handsome, Michelangelo was notoriously awkward, grumpy, and a total loner. And he actively hated Leonardo.
They had beef.
Massive Renaissance beef. But the key psychological insight from Michelangelo is that he fiercely defined himself strictly as a sculptor. The marble David was his soul. That was his true medium. He painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel essentially on the side, and he bitterly resented the Pope for forcing him to do it.
That is wild. Imagine painting the Sistine Chapel, arguably the greatest fresco in human history,
Yeah.
as a side gig that you were actively annoyed about.
He hated it. He even wrote a miserable little poem about how much the project was ruining his life. He complained about getting a goiter from looking up and how paint was dripping in his face and his back was breaking. He literally signed off the poem by saying, "I am not a painter." That is the attitude you bring up. It humanizes genius.
And the third member of that trinity, Raphael.
Raphael was the quintessential party boy. He was young, beautiful, and wildly successful. And he died tragically at the age of 37. The scandal, and this is a great one to whisper conspiratorially over drinks, is that according to contemporary biographers, he died after a, quote, long night of excessive sex with his mistress.
Well, what a way to go down in the history books.
It certainly cements his rock star legend. But analytically, artistically, you want to point out that he was a bit of a brilliant copycat. He was a synthesizer. He looked at what Leonardo was doing with the Mona Lisa, and he completely lifted that triangular structure for his own portrait, Maddalena Doni. He saw the raw power of Michelangelo's bodies and smoothed them out to make them more palatable. He took the intense, rugged breakthroughs of the Renaissance and turned them into flawless, commercial pop music.
Okay, moving past the pristine trinity, we get into the disruptors, the artists who broke the rules, Titian, El Greco, Caravaggio. And honestly, Caravaggio sounds like a guy who belongs on a modern FBI most wanted poster, not in a museum.
He literally did belong on a wanted poster. Caravaggio is the ultimate bad boy of the Baroque period. He wasn't just rebellious, he was an actual, literal murderer.
A murderer, like an assassin.
Like a street brawler. He killed a man in Rome during a violent brawl, allegedly over a disputed bet on a tennis match, or the medieval equivalent of tennis. He had a raging temper. He walked the streets armed with a sword, and he actually had to acquire a special legal license to carry it because he was known to be so incredibly dangerous.
That is terrifying. How does that translate to his art?
That is exactly the talking point. His art revolutionized painting because he dragged it down into the dirt. Instead of painting idealized, glowing saints, he pulled real people off the gritty streets of Rome. He used actual prostitutes and homeless beggars as the physical models for the Virgin Mary and the Apostles.
Wow.
He brought the divine down into the darkest, grimiest alleys, and he pioneered this intense lighting technique called chiaroscuro extreme light, piercing through pitch-black shadows.
Right, the light and dark.
Exactly. Light and dark on the canvas, light and dark in his fractured soul. If you stand in front of a Caravaggio and say, you can really see the violence of his personal life reflected in the aggressive chiaroscuro here, people will just step back and assume you are a museum curator.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit, moving out of the Renaissance and Baroque and charting the path toward the modern era. We hit Goya.
Goya is the crucial bridge between classicism and modern psychological horror. He started out very successfully as a wealthy court painter for the Spanish royals, but then he suffered a severe illness that left him completely deaf. And being isolated in that silence, his worldview turned incredibly dark.
This is the era of his black paintings, right?
Yes. The black paintings, these were terrifying, nightmarish images. And the most shocking part, he didn't paint them for a gallery. He painted things like Saturn devouring his son, this gruesome image of a god eating a human body directly onto the plaster walls of his own dining room in his private house.
I cannot imagine trying to eat dinner with that on the wall.
It's the ultimate loss of appetite. But socially, the point you make is that Goya was using this horror as a direct political critique of the corruption and madness of his era. He saw the ugliness of humanity, and he forced himself to live inside it. He is the grandfather of modern artistic cynicism.
Now, speaking of the transition to modern art, here's the absolute minefield that I think trips up 90% of casual museum goers. Manet versus Monet.
Oh, the classic trap.
That's a one-letter difference in their names.
Yeah.
But they are totally different vibes. How do we build a cheat sheet to keep them straight forever?
This is perhaps the single most useful tactical tip in the entire art section. The confusion is totally understandable. They were contemporaries, they lived in France, they were even friends. But you must distinguish them to survive a gallery party. Let's start with Manet, spelled M-A-N-E-T.
Manet with an A.
Right. Manet was the scandal maker. He is the father of realism. You memorize his painting Olympia. It featured a completely naked courtesan, a sex worker, staring coldly and directly at the viewer, accompanied by a black servant and a black cat. She wasn't an idealized Greek goddess. She was a real, working, modern woman of Paris. And it completely outraged the French public. Manet is the bridge to Impressionism, but he considered himself a serious realist and largely refused to exhibit his work with the Impressionists.
Okay, so Manet with an A equals scandal and realism. What about Monet?
Monet, spelled M-O-N-E-T. He is the water lilies. He is the quintessential impressionist, and the mnemonic device the book gives, which is genius, is the word money.
Money.
Yes, Monet sounds exactly like money, and who buys Monet? The incredibly wealthy, the nouveau riche. Hedge fund managers buy Monet. His work is safe, it is soothing, it is beautiful, and it is astronomically expensive. It's soft water lilies, it's haystacks at sunset, it's cathedrals dissolving in the morning light. There is nothing offensive or scandalous about it. It is purely aesthetic.
So if you're at a party and you see soft, blurry pastel flowers, you think,
You think, that looks incredibly expensive. That looks like money, therefore, it is Monet.
Monet is money. That is incredibly helpful. I will legitimately never forget that. Now let's move to the era of the tortured artists, starting with the most famous one, Vincent van Gogh.
The mythology around Van Gogh is so thick, you have to know how to cut through it with a crisp fact. The prevailing pop culture myth is that he went entirely mad, hacked off his entire ear with a butcher knife, and mailed it to a girlfriend.
Right, that's what everyone learns in middle school.
The cheat sheet correction, the fact that makes you look like an insider, is that he didn't use a knife, he used a razor. He only severed a portion of the lower earlobe, not the whole thing. And he didn't give it to a romantic girlfriend. He wrapped it in paper and handed it to a worker at a local brothel.
Which paints a much grittier, sadder, more realistic picture of his mental breakdown.
It does. It removes the romanticized Hollywood gloss. And the other massive talking point is his masterpiece, Starry Night. People assume he painted it standing out in a breezy wheat field. The truth is, he painted it while locked inside an asylum.
And he checked himself in, didn't he?
He voluntarily entered the asylum. He was deeply aware of his own mental illness. He painted Starry Night looking through the iron bars of his window, largely from memory and fevered imagination. When you look at that sky, that violent, swirling cosmic energy, you are looking at a direct visualization of a brilliant mind descending into neurological chaos.
Let's talk about the absolute titan of the 20th century, Picasso. We go from torture to just massive planetary ego.
The ego of Picasso is almost unmatched in human history. The legend his mother loved to tell was that his very first spoken words as a baby were "piz, piz," which is short for lapis, the Spanish word for pencil. He was literally born demanding a drawing utensil.
That's a great myth-building detail.
You need to know his basic eras to sound competent. The blue period was when he was young, deeply depressed, and freezing in Paris, painting poor people. The rose period warmed up with pinks and oranges, focusing on circus performers and harlequins. But if you want to dominate a conversation, you bring up his anti-war, massive mural, Guernica.
The ultimate political painting.
Yes. But here is the provocative, slightly dangerous thought the author suggests dropping at a dinner party to really stir the pot. You lean in and ask, do you think Picasso fundamentally stopped being a truly great, innovative artist after 1937?
Ooh, just questioning the latter half of his entire life.
Exactly. There is a very valid critical argument that after he painted Guernica, he became so wealthy and universally adored that he stopped pushing boundaries. He just started coasting on his own massive fame, churning out variations of his old styles for millions of dollars. Suggesting that out loud will definitely start a fight with an art snob, but it's a fight you can easily defend.
I love a good, defensible, controversial opinion. What about Salvador Dali?
Dali, the man who famously declared, "I am surrealism." The quirk here is truly, deeply bizarre, and it explains so much of his fractured psychology. He honestly believed he was the literal reincarnation of his older brother.
Wait, what?
Yes. He had an older brother, also named Salvador, who died 9 months before Dali was born. His parents took him to the brother's grave when he was a young child and told him he was the reincarnation. He spent his entire life trying to prove he was his own unique person, not a ghost.
That is some heavy, intense psychological trauma to unpack.
It's the root of all his bizarre behavior, and his personal life was wild. He met his lifelong muse and wife, Gela, when she was married to his good friend, the poet Paul Eluard. Dali basically stole her. He was an absolute showman. The melting clocks and the persistence of memory are brilliant, of course, but the man himself, with the waxed mustache and the pet ocelot, he was a walking performance art piece.
Moving to American pop art. Andy Warhol. The soup cans.
Pop art. He coined the phrase, "In the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes." But the dark, dramatic detail to bring up, the one that grounds him in reality, is the assassination attempt.
Most people don't know he was shot.
They don't. In 1968, a radical feminist writer named Valerie Solanas walked into his studio, The Factory, and shot him point blank. He miraculously survived, but he was declared clinically dead for a few minutes. He had to wear a surgical corset for the rest of his life to hold his organs together.
Wow.
When you drop that fact, it instantly adds this layer of intense, tragic vulnerability to a man who spent his whole career trying to seem completely plastic, robotic, and removed from human emotion.
Okay, so we've successfully navigated the high-pressure art gallery.
Yeah.
We've managed to distinguish our Manets from our Monets without looking like Muppets. Now, let's pivot to a different kind of cultural pressure cooker, the theater, or specifically how to survive talking about New York or London theater without actually having to pay hundreds of dollars to see every show.
Theater conversations can be deeply exhausting because there is so much elitism built into them. People love to aggressively brag about what obscure avant-garde shows they've seen. The cheat sheet gives you a great defense mechanism starting with Shakespeare, the Shakespeare stats.
Right. If someone is going on and on about the underlying themes of King Lear and you haven't read it since high school, what do?
You drop the numbers, you look thoughtful and say, the sheer volume of his output is what always staggers me. Shakespeare used about 17,000 different words across his plays. But the crazy part is, he personally invented roughly 1,700 of them.
10% of his entire vocabulary he just made up on the spot.
Basically. He needed a word to fit the meter, so he invented it. Common words we use every day. Eyeball, puking, gossip, swagger, bedazzled. He just coined them out of thin air.
So how was that a survival strategy in the conversation?
Because you use it to instantly build rapport and commiserate. If someone is honest and says, I watched Hamlet and I just honestly didn't understand half of what they were saying, you don't judge them. You validate them. You say, of course you didn't. Don't feel bad. He invented 1,700 words. Nobody fully understands him without a glossary. It makes the other person feel incredibly relieved, and it makes you look like a benevolent, highly educated literary historian.
That's beautiful. And for anyone living in or visiting New York City, there is a very specific maneuver the book outlines. The Elmo pivot.
The Elmo pivot. This is hilarious and intensely practical. So imagine you are stuck in a circle of people aggressively debating a new, highly conceptual Broadway revival of Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House. They are arguing about the lighting design in the third act. You have not seen the play. You are completely lost. You need an immediate exit strategy.
What's the line?
You wait for a tiny pause and you say, "Speaking of the theater district, where are the best places to go pre-theater these days? It's getting so hard to find a hidden culinary gem amongst all the irritable Elmos in Times Square."
Irritable Elmos, because Times Square's just flooded with those people in the knockoff mascot costumes harassing tourists for tips.
Exactly. And they are notoriously grumpy when they take off the heads. Here's why this pivot is genius. Absolutely everyone who has ever set foot in New York City has a strong, passionate opinion on the sheer chaos of Times Square, and everyone loves giving restaurant recommendations.
Right. You've completely changed the game.
You have flawlessly, seamlessly moved the conversation away from the critique of 19th century Norwegian drama to the incredibly safe, universal territory of, where can I get a good, reasonably priced burger near 42nd Street? You escape the trap without anyone noticing.
Brilliant. Now, let's talk about the marathon that is award season.
Yeah.
The Oscars, the Tonys, the Grammys. It feels like a massive homework assignment to keep up with all the nominees every single year.
The author proposes a grand unifying theory for surviving awards season conversations. And it boils down to two words: sartorial selection. Fashion.
Fashion over film.
Entirely. You do not need to have seen the 3-hour indie movie. You do not need to have listened to the experimental jazz album. You literally just need to spend 5 minutes looking at the red carpet photo galleries on your phone the next morning. You evaluate the dresses, the tuxedos, the who wore it best.
Yeah.
That gives you immediate entry into the cultural water cooler chat.
But she takes it a step further, doesn't she, to prevent you from sounding shallow?
Yes, this is where she introduces the ultimate pivot. It's the technique of the high-low mix. You fuse something trivial with something profoundly serious in the exact same breath.
How does that actually work in practice?
Imagine you were at the office coffee machine. You fake a casual opinion on, say, Jennifer Lawrence's red carpet dress. You say, the structural cut of that Dior gown was certainly a bold choice for her. And then, without missing a beat, you pivot to the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Speaking of bold choices, did you happen to read the dissenting opinion in the Supreme Court ruling yesterday?
That is complete, utter mental whiplash for the listener.
It is. It completely disarms them. If you can smoothly transition from critiquing the drape of a sequined gown to analyzing the intricacies of a federal legal argument in under 10 seconds, you immediately become the most fascinating, multidimensional person in the room. You aren't just a gossip, and you aren't just a dry academic. You are a true polymath.
We are heading into the final stretch here, the section on advanced social survival strategies. These are the nuclear options, the big red buttons you press when you really truly need to shut a conversation down or physically escape a room.
Let's start with the heaviest artillery, the Nietzschean nuclear option.
When do you use this?
You deploy this when you are trapped in a corner by what the author calls a bombastic buffoon. This is a person who is incredibly loud, wildly opinionated, dominating the entire group, and crucially, factually, wrong. But you cannot argue with them using logic because they refuse to listen to facts. They just yell louder.
We've all been trapped by that guy,
Yeah.
usually about politics or sports.
Exactly. So you don't fight them on their terms. You go philosophical, you look at them calmly, maybe with a slight sigh, and you say, well, ultimately, I suppose I'm with Nietzsche on this one. There are no facts, only interpretations.
Oh, that just pulls the entire foundational rug right out from under them.
It incinerates the argument. You are effectively looking them in the eye and saying, everything you have just screamed at me for the last 10 minutes is purely subjective, meaningless nonsense. But because you are citing Friedrich Nietzsche, a heavyweight German philosopher, it sounds incredibly profound and sophisticated. It is the most polite, intellectual way imaginable of saying, let's agree to disagree because you are literally impossible to talk to.
And what if you don't want to win the argument? You just want to physically flee the scene.
Then you execute the Truman Capote exit.
How's that go?
This is for when a conversation has just died or it's getting weird and you need to leave the circle. You take a breath and quote the great Truman Capote. You say, well, as Truman Capote so brilliantly put it, I don't care what anybody says about me as long as it isn't true. Now, if you'll excuse me, shall we go hover by the kitchen and see if we can be the first to intercept the hot hors d'oeuvres?
That is so smooth. Why does that specific combination work so well?
It's a three-pronged attack. One, it quotes a famous literary icon, and Capote was the undisputed king of New York socialites, so it fits the party setting perfectly. Two, it utilizes self-deprecating humor, playfully implying that people might start spreading nasty, untrue rumors about you the second you walk away.
And three.
Three, and most importantly, it directs the physical movement of the group toward the food. The author makes a profound sociological observation here. You will always, always meet the best people by the kitchen.
That is a fundamental law of the universe.
It is. The pretentious, exhausting people are always out in the living room, loudly debating monetary policy or avant-garde theater to prove how smart they are. The genuinely fun, relaxed, interesting people are in the kitchen, eating the shrimp cocktail and laughing. The Capote exit gets you to the shrimp.
I live my entire life by that rule. Always locate the kitchen. Always find the shrimp.
It's a survival mechanism.
Now, before we wrap up, we have to issue one highly specific, vital warning for our listeners, specifically regarding the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. The book calls it the cider warning.
Yes. This is practically a public health and safety announcement. The linguistic divide over the word cider is genuinely dangerous. In America, if it is October and you offer a friend some apple cider, you're handing them a mug of sweet, cloudy, non-alcoholic pressed apple juice. It's a wholesome autumn trait you give to toddlers after a hayride.
Delicious and completely innocent.
However, in the UK, the word cider means alcohol. Specifically, fermented apple alcohol that can be surprisingly, devastatingly strong. So if a well-meaning American tourist offers a British child a pint of cider, the parents are going to call the police. And conversely, if a British person orders a cider at an American diner expecting a buzz, they're going to be deeply confused by their apple juice. Knowing that distinction is a crisp fact that literally bridges a cultural divide and prevents international incidents.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to return to that core psychological concept you mentioned right at the beginning, the idea of truthiness. It feels like this entire book, all these strategies and pivots and memorized facts, it's all dancing right on the ethical edge of truthiness.
It absolutely is. The term was originally coined by Stephen Colbert, and it describes this modern phenomenon where people tend to believe a concept is true simply because it feels intuitively true in their gut, completely regardless of the actual empirical facts or evidence.
Which sounds dangerous.
It can be. But Lloyd Webber's argument is highly pragmatic. She is saying that in our chaotic, noisy, extremely judgmental world, truthiness often wins the social battle. Now, she is absolutely not telling us to lie. She's not telling us to invent facts or be malicious frauds.
Right, she's not saying make up a fake Renaissance art.
No, she is telling us to deliberately curate our knowledge. The cheat sheet isn't a tool for deception. It is a psychological security blanket. It's about planting those few deeply rooted anchors of knowledge in your mind, knowing the story of Jadot's perfect circle, understanding the distinct difference between Manet and Monet, having the word avarice loaded in the chamber, so that when the spotlight hits you, you do not panic.
Because the panic is the real enemy.
Exactly. When you don't panic, your CPU doesn't crash. When you don't panic, you stop relying on the lazy linguist crutches. You stop saying like and you know every 5 seconds. You speak slowly and you speak with authority. And that projected confidence physically becomes your reality to the people listening. It empowers you to participate in the human experience. You do not have to be the foremost academic expert on the panel. You just have to be a willing, competent player in the social game.
It reminds me of the Einstein quote the author uses to anchor the philosophy of the book. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself.
That is the ultimate test of intelligence.
You don't need to be able to recite a 400-page academic dissertation on the socio-economic impacts of the Italian Renaissance. That's boring anyway. You just need to be able to sit at a bar, look your friend in the eye, and tell the engaging, simple story of a guy drawing a perfect red circle to impress the Pope. That ability to distill complexity into narrative, that is true understanding.
And we pair that with Desmond Tutu's incredible wisdom. Don't raise your voice, improve your argument. When you have these disarming words in your pocket, when you can deploy hauteur or borborygmus or disestablishmentarianism, you never need to shout over the bombastic buffoon. Your vocabulary does all the heavy lifting for you. It cuts through the noise like a scalpel.
And, above all else, you actively avoid being perceived as a muppet, which, at the end of the day, is the ultimate goal of human interaction.
Honestly, it really is. Just don't be a muppet.
So here is our final challenge, our provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over this week. We've given you a lot of tools today, but you do not need to log off right now and frantically read the entire canon of Western literature tonight. You don't need to memorize the periodic table of elements to find the noble gases.
Please don't do that. You'll burn out.
Right. Instead, pick just one single thing we unpacked today. Maybe it's memorizing the Elmo pivot for your next awkward work party. Maybe it's finally locking in the difference between Manet and Monet using the money trick. Or maybe, and this is the hardest one, it is just making a silent promise to yourself to stop saying the word like as a filler and instead forcing yourself to embrace the power of silence.
Silence is incredibly powerful.
Take that one specific thing, that one tool, and intentionally carry it into your very next conversation. Test it out in the real world. See if it subtly changes the way the people in the room look at you, and more importantly, deeply internally, see if it changes the way you feel about yourself when the spotlight turns your way.
Go forth. Defeat the lazy linguist. Be a cunning, prepared, intelligent conversationalist. And if all of this fails, if the anxiety still hits and your mind still goes completely blank,
What do?
just quote Truman Capote and head directly to the kitchen for the snacks.
That is unequivocally the best advice of all. Find the shrimp. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Intelligent Conversationalist. We hope you feel a little more armed, a little less anxious, and ready to take on the dinner party circuit. We will see you all next time.
Goodbye, and good luck out there.